Well, good morning. I'm here with Doug to talk about 23andNobody. Uh, it's is Friday, September 20th, 2024. And yeah, there it is. That'll come eventually. But the first one I got here is a story at the Register, which is pretty interesting. Google Cloud apparently has made a product to compete with Microsoft Copilot. Now they've made a product that will run an AI that will search through your documents in Google Cloud and help reveal the content. And I'm not having luck finding the name of it, but it's a document AI, a Google Cloud service that uses
Right.
machine learning to extract information from documents. But unlike Microsoft Copilot, they made it run with a different account, a service account, which it turns out has high permissions, so it can search documents that you don't have the right to see. So you can extract information from documents that you don't have permission to see, and therefore that's a pretty serious security hole.
I
So
see.
yeah. So a vulnerability researcher reported it, and I think they didn't fix it. Yeah, it's still wide open. They reported it to Google and even got paid a bounty, but Google didn't fix it, and they've released like the proof of concept and stuff. So it's pretty much a boondoggle.
Yeah.
But you may remember, like years ago, Google announced maybe 8 years ago that they were going to have to make a social network, and the bonus of everyone at the whole company depended on them having a social network that was one of the top two by the end of the year. And so they had three social networks in a hurry that were all monumental flaming disasters. And now they've been clearly trying to achieve dominance in the cloud market for at least 8 years and trying to somehow get up there with AWS and Azure and totally failing. I mean, they're just like the second rate service, which has to hand out a lot of free services while all my students are using it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they continue to be sort of a boondoggle in their cloud stuff. Um, and so there's a paper from Rice University, which points out a
Okay.
difficulty I did not know. Now, Stable Diffusion is an amazing product. And what you do is you take some pictures of real Picassos, say, and then you gradually add noise to them in little steps until they're completely erased by noise. And then you train your AI to remove the noise. And now to generate a new Picasso, you just have a picture full of noise and you remove it and it turns into a Picasso. I would never have believed this would work, but it really works. And it's so efficient, you can run it yourself in a free Google Colab machine. So the problem is, I didn't realize this. They train them on square pictures. And if you try to make a picture with a different aspect ratio, like 16:9, they don't know how to extend it. So if you ask for one cat, you'll get two cats, one on the left and half of a cat on the right, and stuff like that. So this is actually a huge problem. So this Rice researcher has fixed that. And this article doesn't go into
Oh,
technical details, but it sounds like this might actually be promising. What he did was it's called elastic diffusion, and it uses noise with two data types, local and global. The
okay.
local signal contains pixel-level detail information like the shape of an eye or the texture of a dog's fur. The global signal contains more of an overall outline of the image. Elastic diffusion separates the local and global signals into conditional and unconditional generation paths. This produces better images, but takes up to 6 to 9 times as long to make an image. And the thing that got my attention, I don't really care that much about AI generated art, is the idea that there can be unconditional generation paths in a machine learning model is getting close to what we have all been longing for, which is some way to have administrative commands in the model which enforce the security model and have more power than the user generated content, which is the fundamental problem with all large language models, that they're all subject to prompt injection, which they call I forget the name of AI models, but you can give them commands and you can override the security barriers that were placed there by the administrator because there's no way to give those commands more force. So maybe these unconditional generation paths would be good for that. Anyway,
Hmm.
the machine learning model continues to move forward.
I see.
I got another one
I
here
see.
that might be, and again, a big step forward. So Seattle got hit by ransomware, the Seattle port and airport, and they've been down for weeks, but they refused to pay the ransom. And people are
Wait,
applauding this.
So
Yeah.
wait, SeaTac Airport?
Seattle Port and Airport. Let me see if it's called SeaTac. I'll bring up the article. Um, it is 3 weeks after the ransomware. The Port of Seattle and the Seattle Tacoma, Seattle Tacoma International Airport are still recovering systems. Uh, they managed to recover baggage services, check-in, ticketing, Wi-Fi display boards, app services, and more. But the main external website and internal portals are still down. So they're gradually recovering. But the interesting news item is they refuse to pay the ransom, which is rare. I mean, I would like to see a law that no government agency or police department is ever allowed to pay the ransom. Um, and people are applauding them for that. So that's one interesting thing. And then they haven't yet had the second extortion part where they sell the data and embarrass them, but that's expected. But apparently they braced themselves to just tolerate that. But they were
Yeah.
hacked. They were ransomwared by a group called Rysita, and this is a Russian-speaking cyber crew that is apparently a part-time cyber militia for the Russian regime. Apparently, Russia has basically made privateers. They have authorized criminals to attack Americans, and applaud them as part of the government. And I guess I've heard about this for decades. In Russia, they tell all the criminals that it's perfectly fine to commit crimes as long as you do it outside Russia, and we will protect you and not extradite you and stuff. And so anyway, these guys are effectively an organ of a state-sponsored regime, and Russia's called on these ransomware gangs to act patriotically and launch destructive attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure. And an airport would certainly qualify. So, if all of us would just quit paying the ransom, this would stop. Although, to be fair,
Yeah.
the state-sponsored military attacks would probably continue because they probably don't care about the ransom. They just want to do
Right.
harm. But all the independent criminals would go do something else, like go back to sending spam or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So SeaTac Airport is like Oakland Airport or San Francisco. National, international flights, and it's the big center for the Seattle, big airport for Seattle.
Which is the main way you reach Microsoft, right?
Yeah, if you're going to Microsoft, Amazon,
Yeah.
um, you know,
So
that's
I'm glad to
interesting.
see them take the righteous path and not pay the ransom, even though
Yeah, so I wonder how come we haven't heard more about this attack.
I don't know. I think
Um,
this article is from 3 days ago. So
yeah, so it confirmed it brought down websites, email,
yeah.
and
And
many airport services.
I think it brought down a lot of other services, but they've recovered from most of them.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So another one here, the Mac has an update, Mac OS Sequoia, and it is breaking things. It's breaking security tools and VPNs because apparently they've upgraded their firewall, and the new firewall is too vigorous at blocking external traffic, and it's even blocking some DNS resolutions. So a lot of things people are using are broken by it. So well, people are blocking, saying don't update. I never update my Mac very promptly, although I put on security patches for the OS, but I don't upgrade to the newest version of the OS in any hurry because you don't have
Yeah,
to, and it's more risk than benefit. In a similar vein, I'm hearing a lot of people really worried. Windows 10 is coming to end of life. You probably know this better than me. Very soon, right? And the problem is people are supposed to go to Windows 11, but most of them can't because of the outrageous hardware requirements. So they're expected to just junk all those Windows 10 machines. This seems very impractical. I think Microsoft did this with, what was it, XP? They kept promising to end it and then extending it for years. And I
yeah.
hope they extend Windows 10 for years because nobody wants Windows 11. It's garbage.
Wait, was it XP or was it Windows 7?
Might have been one of them. They said they
Yeah,
were going to end it, and then they kept dragging it off, and ended up extending its life for several years due to customer
yeah,
demand. And I
yeah.
think the number of people actually want Windows 11 is very small. It's like maybe 10% of the user base. Everybody would rather have Windows 10.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Microsoft.
I think people would be happy with Windows 7.
Well, that's right, or XP for that matter. It's why Microsoft's business model is kind of messed up. They keep putting out a new version that mostly just irritates the end users and trying to
Right.
force you to use it. It seems like Apple's better, although I don't bother updating my Apples very much. But I mean, anyway, but Apple sells hardware, so they don't really care if I update to their new OS.
True.
Anyway,
True.
I
Yeah.
got a couple more here. So I heard about this big Chinese botnet. And I talked about it a couple days ago in class, and the student said, "What kind of things did it infect?" And I didn't know. Well, now I found an article on Bleeping Computer that tells you what it's infected. This is the Chinese government, just like the Riceta is basically the Russian government. This is the Chinese government making a huge botnet, and I'm not quite sure what kind of attacks they've been performing, but they built this thing for years. They call it Raptor Train. It's infected 260,000 devices, and those devices are routers and IP cameras. And it's really much more sophisticated than I thought. The previous article I read compared it to the malware that just infected like cameras with a default password, Mirai. But this is
Yeah.
much more sophisticated. They're using 0 days and all sorts of fancy ways to take over these devices. So it's clearly a military operation. Now, that raises the question, I don't know if our military is doing this. I doubt it. But why would you need a botnet? What are you going to do with a huge botnet of 250,000 devices? DDoS attacks, I guess. Anyway, they keep track of the number of devices. 126,000 are in the United States and in other countries, but they've started in May 2020, and I what's not clear is what they're doing with them. But it's a big botnet done by the military, and it shows the kind of the hostility we've had toward China is pretty justified. I mean, this is a pretty outrageous criminal activity, and I wonder why. It seems like the only thing you could do with a botnet like this would be to perform DDoS attacks, and probably against our critical infrastructure. Anyway,
Yeah.
I, I'm very unhappy to see our relations with China go down and down, and this is not going to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
then I got the one that I thought was the most interesting for the title. 23andMe is dead. Really impressive. 23andMe will do your DNA tests. One of my friends did it, and I said I wouldn't do it. And it turned out that this is a really bad idea because now the police can just arrest anybody in your family who they suspect of a crime based on this. So you really should sort of get their permission before doing it. And predictions about your health and stuff turn out to be about as reliable as tarot cards. So it's not clear what you actually benefit from here. And that's why all the experts in DNA do not do it. They say, there will come a time someday when they give you a DNA test for medical treatment, but that time is not yet. And the other thing is funny, it's not even right about your nationality. They'll tell you you're like 10% American Indian and 3% black and 8% Chinese. And then a few months later, they'll send you another email with different numbers. They can't even get stable numbers about that stuff. But anyway,
Well, there,
yeah,
yeah, there's several companies that do this,
yeah.
and someone or a group of people sent their DNA to all the different companies that do this,
Well,
and
that's a good idea.
they got significantly different results.
Yeah. That's what the experts say. This is just smoke and mirrors. But anyway, 23andMe was funded by the wife of one of the Google founders, with just
Right.
tons of money. And now she had a plan to like finally make a profit. They've never made any money. And her plan is like so bogus and vague. The entire board just quit. She's
I
the
see.
only one left, following a months-long battle to take it private. She wants to take it private and has a plan, and the entire board just quit, saying, after months of work, we have yet to receive from you a fully financed, fully diligenced, actionable proposal that is in the best interest of the non-affiliated shareholders. So basically, her plan makes no sense. They're not going to make any money, and everybody just gives up because they can't work with her. So it just seems like a total boondoggle.
Didn't didn't one of the founders just pass away?
I don't know.
Um,
But I know she's the main one. Wojcicki is her, and she controls 49% of the votes.
yeah, I think maybe that was somebody with Google.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just have one more little one. CISA.
One more little one. Okay.
I'm really impressed with CISA. The CISA has so many good recommendations and useful papers over the last few years. And here they got another one. They finally urge all the software developers to get rid of cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And boy, I've been waiting for this for 20 years like everybody else. Practically every website has this vulnerability, and people just don't care. If you report it, they won't pay you anything. They won't even fix it. And CISA is saying what all the security experts are saying. This really is not good. You really should weed it out. And they have a practical suggestion, which I didn't know. As anybody looks at my website can tell, my website is just as good as it was in 1998, and it hasn't changed any since it was 1998. I use ancient techniques. But modern people use these modern frameworks. And apparently, if you use one of these modern web frameworks, they automatically block cross-site scripting, which is a pretty good idea. I hadn't thought of that. They use modern web frameworks with built-in output encoding functions for proper escaping. So that does make sense. So I guess if you're using whatever the modern ones are, like Angular and Node, and I don't even know what they all are, then maybe the good ones prevent these vulnerabilities. But cross-site scripting took second place in MITRE's top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses. So
Yeah.
it's people are beginning to take it seriously. So maybe something good will happen. CISA has had so many good recommendations. Like, remember about 6 months ago, they had general recommendations for security of home devices, saying make sure there's a way to update it, get rid of the default password, and other things. Like 4 or 5 really sensible suggestions. I guess that's Jen Easterly, but CISA has really been very valuable. In the past, I never thought of the U.S. government as a useful source of security information, but now they really are. Anyway,
Got it.
yeah,
So, Sam, I just did a quick lookup.
yeah,
Let's see. Anne, is it Wosiki?
yeah, the 23andMe woman, yeah.
Yeah. Her sister was the CEO of YouTube.
Oh, well, YouTube
And
makes money, I think.
yeah, so she passed away
Oh,
in August.
yeah.
So
Well, yeah, but this 23andMe always seemed like one of these vanity projects that like a billionaire's wife does that doesn't really get run well or make any sense.
yeah, well, I could make a terrible joke here that Susan should have had her DNA tested, or
And it
maybe
wouldn't
she
have
had
done
a,
any good considering how worthless it is. But I think
yeah, yeah,
this is it's basically nepotism, the relative of the
yeah,
not gets a lot of money to play with. Like Donald Trump, right? He never actually ran a good business. He was just sort of given a lot of money by his father and pretended to run a business and ran it into the ground 7 times. This is common. The people that are too rich don't actually learn to make money.
yeah. So, I will tell you, since I have a background in all this, it does make sense what they're trying to do.
Does it? I mean, what is the whole point
Yeah.
of cataloging everybody's DNA? That you hope eventually will know what it means, just like you might freeze your brain in case they figure out how to bring you back later?
Yeah, actually, I took a class from someone that actually did that and had the people in Emeryville that were frozen.
Yeah, I keep I guess I've reached a certain age. I get paper mail from people offering me burial plots and to freeze my body. So I guess I'm old enough.
Oh, see, you must be the smart one. Nobody has asked me to freeze my body.
I don't know. I throw it away, but I'm sort of insulted that this is the offer I get. But
So, Sam, it's kind of interesting.
the Neptune Society, that's the one I get from.
Yeah, the Neptune Society.
Yeah,
So, they're also biodegrading people. That's a
yeah,
new trend right now.
composting your body. Yeah, I've heard of this one. Which,
Yeah, body composting.
well, that seems probably a lot more environmental than the normal technique where they fill you full of god awful poisons and bury you, which seems like that's defeating the whole point. I mean,
Yeah.
logically,
It
you should be returned back to the environment to grow more crops or something.
yeah. So, yeah, you can feed the world. Do
Soylent
your
Green, man.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I remember I saw an old TV show years ago, and they had this sarcastic billionaire, and he died, and they had a video, and he said, "Well, as for my body, it should be put to any use anybody can make of it." Which is my feeling. When my dad died, he didn't leave any instructions, so we donated him to medicine. I said, that's what he would have liked. He's going to be one of the cadavers they cut up and learn surgery or something. Could he be a biologist? I said, sure, he'd go for that.
Yeah.
And so would I. I mean, what the hell? If I'm done with my body, it might as well be put to some kind of use.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, they've got potentially the right idea. There are some diseases that you can tell through DNA,
Yeah.
and but they're not looking at the entire sequence. They're looking at pieces of the sequence. And a lot of the DNA sequence is, they call it junk, or they used to call it junk, and we're not exactly sure. A lot of it, our DNA has been inherited from our ancestral family tree.
Yeah.
So I think it's, we just don't know enough, but it was a start.
Well, there's a similar thing. I've heard on the podcasts that the rich people are going to pay like a few $1,000 to get a whole body detailed MRI scan, even though they're
Yeah.
not sick, to try to look for things, look for smaller problems. And what we have usually, our medicine is you don't do anything until you get sick, and then you try to treat that disease. But maybe at some point you'll actually get like, uh, intervention before that. Oh, you have a small problem here, so you should make a small adjustment now to avoid getting sick later. That would be better, I suppose.
Well, Sam, we've been doing that. We tell people not to smoke. We tell people not to take in a lot of sugar.
Sure, but
We,
it's not customized. That's right. It's
yeah,
it's it's generic advice. Like, I remember I
yeah,
get medicine and it says adult dose 2 to 3 tablets. And ever since I was a little kid, I said, shouldn't this be different for different people?
yeah,
And the
and
fact is, it's just in huge categories, like from children from 6 to 12 is one dose, and adults is like another dose. That's a
yeah,
really crude model. In principle, they should like measure your DNA and then know the right dose for you.
yeah, we're far from that.
Well, yeah,
Far from
I know
that.
there are some drugs where they actually do customize it like that. Like I think it's warfarin. There's like one that thins your blood,
Yeah, that's
and they do
warfarin.
very carefully calibrate the right dosage for people.
Well, there, it's a little tricky because if you overdose, then you bleed out, you can't clot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think insulin too. I
Yeah.
mean, there are drugs that have to be calibrated like this.
Yeah, insulin is a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And Sam, the other thing you brought up was your DNA being used by law enforcement.
yeah.
Now, there were some laws that were passed against that. Law enforcement cannot use that type of DNA to profile suspects, which they have done in the past.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. So it is, I'm not going to say it's not 100% accurate, but it has helped solve crimes.
Oh, yeah. I remember there's like a famous serial killer they caught because like his brother went to
Yeah,
23andNobody or something. So, I mean, and just like, putting surveillance cameras everywhere, of course, it will lead to defeating some crime, but at the
right.
cost of some loss of privacy. And the thing that struck me when this first hit the news, it was the Trump administration. And at that time, I was very concerned about basically the rise of Nazism. I mean, and in fact, someone did hack into one of these companies and then publish a list of all the Jews, thinking people would pay for that. And the government could easily pay for that in order to like hunt them down and put them in concentration camps. And they could do the same. And that's Trump is now back to his 100% racist garbage about the Haitians in Springfield. That's his whole platform is race hatred. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's why when I was a kid, I remember my parents said, you shouldn't use credit cards, you should pay with cash, you shouldn't leave a trail, you shouldn't let the government know anything. And I said, why? I'm not doing anything bad. If I'm not doing bad, there's nothing to worry about. They said, you're going to find out, kid. And they pointed out like Sacco and Vanzetti, they said, you might be doing nothing wrong, but the government will just decide to hunt down your kind. And I have come to decide they are correct.
Hmm. So, it's kind of interesting you bring that up about government. Over the past 2, 3 days, there was two small planes that collided in Nevada, just south of Reno. And it was one gentleman who restores older planes. That's very well known. And there was a Civil Air Patrol. They
Hmm?
were getting their test flight, and they were at a uncontrolled airport, which is an airport that doesn't have a control tower. And there's a anti-collision device that you can have so that small planes, it's relatively inexpensive, but that way, if they're two small planes are getting too close to each other, they can communicate and alert each other. And it turns out that the Civil Air Patrol had their device running, but the gentleman that restores these planes was afraid of government and FAA tracking his flights
Yeah.
and was known to turn his device off. Had his device been on,
Yeah.
he would be alive today.
Yeah.
And at the collision of the two planes, one of them, amazingly, their propeller sliced right into the plane of the guy who died. So his plane was no longer airworthy, spun to the ground. He passed away. The other two, with the pilot getting the check ride for the Civil Air Patrol, their engine has been displaced. One of the blades of the propeller is missing, but they were able to land successfully and walk away, which is pretty incredible for a midair collision.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to balance it. There is a good side
Right.
from all this tracking,
Yeah.
and then there's a bad side, and there's always just going to be a struggle.
Yeah. 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 So, and sometimes your your failure to use it can cause harm to someone else.
Yes, or yourself.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
or
This is
yourself.
this
Yeah.
is like
Yeah.
the current big failure, which or people say they won't take the vaccine because they just trust the government so much. That's
Yeah.
and by the way, I just got a notice early this morning that YouTube took down one of my videos for vaccine disinformation. They might take this one down. What I've learned is if you say anything about it, their AI will flag it. So several of these
Really?
podcasts, if we have any article about the vaccine, they'll pop up an informational message. But apparently they found one and took it down. I'll have to protest it because before they said, if we take three things down, we're going to cancel your whole account and duke all your videos. And they're all false positives. When I send them into appeal, they say, "Oh, you're actually saying the truth about the vaccine." Well, we didn't think that was possible. We just assume if anybody says anything about the vaccine, it's a lie, which is probably not a bad security policy. If you, but anyway, they have a dumb
You
AI.
know that's interesting that it's an automatic
Yeah.
flagging. Hmm.
Well, this latest email said we use a combination of AI and human to detect problems, and it also didn't say they're going to nuke my account for three strikes. So if they just took down an occasional load video, I might not care. But the idea where they're going to nuke everything, including all my class lectures and everything, is disturbing. That's why I made two accounts now. I use a separate one for class lectures and this podcast.
Yeah.
But I think it was one of my 10-minute news sections at the start of class they took down. So that'll be on my class one. So that's the one I really don't want them to nuke. So
Yeah.
that's why I've heard other people have learned to just use another word for the COVID or the vaccine. Never use those words. You just refer to like that problem, and then AI won't flag you.
Yeah. The anti-vaxxers, can I say
Yeah.
that word or are we going to get
Might as well
nuked?
talk about it. They'll probably complain about this video, but I've accepted that. Let them get mad.
Yeah, the anti-vaxxers have gotten enough people not to take the measles vaccine
Oh yeah.
that it's coming out, I won't say in pandemic, but it's approaching
Oh yeah.
pandemic.
And now Trump is saying he's going to end federal funding for every school that has any vaccine mandate at all. So we can expect whooping cough and polio to come back.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. I was just hearing like 15% of Republicans say they are willing to commit violence if Trump doesn't win, and like 55%. Oh no, wait, no, almost all Republicans believe that they're illegal Haitians eating the dogs in Springfield. It's like
So
45%
Sam,
of yeah.
do you know where that came from?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of sources, but the main one is this one woman that actually did complain because she was,
On Facebook.
yeah, she on Facebook,
Yeah.
her cat was missing, so she said, well, the Haitians ate it. Then she found the cat a couple days later and now just is apologizing. But just because her cat was missing, she assumed that her neighbors ate it.
Well, I think, yeah, yeah, it took off from Facebook, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, there were a couple other starts. There was an actual Nazi group that posted a similar thing. And this goes all the way back. This is the blood libel. It used to be they're killing your children and drinking their blood.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way back. It's clear from a psychological point of view. I understand this. If there's one thing everyone is terrified of, then it will, of course, spin up as if the witches are killing the children, the
Yeah.
hated group is paying, because everyone's afraid that somebody will kill your children. So, and they see those pictures on the milk boxes and say, oh, that could be my kid, and it's a panic. So that it's fertile ground for any kind of rumor to spread that
Yeah.
your beloved companions are in danger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, interesting, huh? How this is spreading around
Well,
and how quickly.
I see the human society as like a complex structure that has certain failure modes. And this is an obvious failure mode. Like if this pops up, it will grow. And it reminds me of like individual humans. Humans can easily fall into paranoia, where they're convinced some group is conspiring against me because we each have some level of anxiety and risk. And it would be easy to just for that to grow into sort of a tumor. It makes sense though.
Yeah. So this comes up with, we talked about this about a month ago, false dividends.
I mean, where you get some kind of reward for doing something harmful.
Well, what you're doing is you're just spreading disinformation, and it gets propagated out there that all of a sudden people start believing it.
Well, yeah, it spreads because it answers an emotional need and it
Right.
rewards you because now you're seen as like a heroic figure saving people from this risk. So
Yeah.
it's a way to gain social status. So it makes sense.
Yeah. And the Pizzagate, do you remember that?
Oh yeah, very similar. That
And
people are hurting your children and you could like we could unite to fight those bad people.
well, I think what wasn't the story with Pizzagate that the Clintons had kids that were in the
Oh yeah.
basement of a pizza
Yeah,
parlor?
that's right. And then but I think it was because of all the emails. And they did, in fact, go to some pizza place and they decided that that was code word for exploiting children. So I think
Yeah.
it started from the hacker brushes emails, but basically this will just pop up randomly all the time. It's a fear that everybody has, and
Well,
so every now and
it's a
then something will pop up.
yeah. So it's a fear that everybody has, or most people would have.
Yeah,
Yeah, the vast majority of people. And as I recall, there was a gentleman from maybe North Carolina that was driving up there because he was so disgusted that the police, law
right.
enforcement wasn't saving the kids.
That's right.
He made a video to his kids while he was driving up there in his car saying, I've got to save these kids. Essentially, I hope you'll look at me as a hero. He gets to the pizza parlor and starts shooting,
Yeah, yeah,
and he finds out there's no basement.
yeah. And
Yeah.
this, I think, this is the harsh thing. And I think one thing that amazed me was I read a New York Times article about a year ago. They went and interviewed QAnon members, and the QAnon members
All
are like
right.
friendly and happy and well-adjusted, just like any other religion. It gives them a community, a sense of purpose, and everything. The fact that it's all lies doesn't really matter so much. Now they feel better about their life. So it's not that different than any other religion. You believe a bunch of nonsense, but it comforts you. Now there's a
Yeah.
reason for things, and there's this heroic trusted figure, Donald Trump being your savior, makes you feel safe and comforted. So
Yeah. 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 We could get into politics a little bit here. I'm just looking here. The Pizzagate shooter was sentenced to 4 years in
yeah.
prison, and it looks like he got out.
Well, he didn't seem like too much of a bad guy, really, but you can't
No,
be
I
doing
don't
it.
think he was a bad guy at all, but
Well, you can't be doing that. You can't be off shooting a gun for no good reason at people.
true.
But he certainly thought he was a hero. But I mean, the question is he going to do it again? And I'd say maybe he is. He's obviously an idiot. He's probably now believing more random conspiracy theories. He might continue to be a danger.
I don't know. I'll tell you a story, Sam, quick. This took place in Virginia, someplace around Washington, D.C. And it was a 22-year-old kid. And he somehow was able to produce letters with FBI letterhead on it. And he also produced like an NSA badge or something like that.
Yeah.
So a friend of his, I won't say good friend, but a friend from him from high school, he contacted. They ran into each other, and the I'll call him the good kid said, I'm looking for a job, and he said, well, I work for the NSA, and I'd like to hire you.
Oh
And he
boy.
says, well, okay, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, we're testing the security of banks. And what I need for you to do is go to a bank, present the letter here saying that you're robbing them. And when you get the money, bring it back to me and I'll return it to the bank and, we'll see how the security goes. And he said, now look, I'm going to give you a letter that's on FBI letterhead that if you get caught, if the police come in, here's my telephone number. You can have them call me.
Man,
And sure enough, he went in, he robbed the bank, he presented the letter. He said, I'm working for the NSA, I'm working for the FBI. And the police that arrested him called the phone number and they were almost convinced if the and maybe one of them was convinced and they were going to let him go, but then they thought something doesn't seem quite right.
that's like a TV show.
I know, but it just goes to show who do you trust?
Well, yes,
So
engineering, yeah.
yeah, so the question is, should he be convicted and have jail time?
Well, the guy that talked him into it
No
is
question about that,
that
right?
guy's guilty. The other guy, maybe you would give him very little time or let him off because he was kind of gullible, but so I, yeah, that's a tough one. He
Yeah,
certainly is a lot less guilty. Although you could make the opposite. You say he's the one that actually robbed the bank. All the other guy did was exercise free speech. You could have a good time in court with lawyers battling this one out.
yeah. So I think, this was probably 10, 12 years ago. As
Yeah.
I recall, he was not charged at all. And the rationale behind this was it wasn't his intent to rob the bank.
Yeah.
I mean, although those were his actions,
Yeah, it's
it,
tough. This is why
yeah,
you have prosecutorial discretion. And, I remember I was
yeah,
just talking about this last night to my students. Maybe 20 years ago, I believed that the law was like clear and you're either a good guy or a bad guy.
yeah,
I've come to learn it's not that way at all. It's like everything you do has some legal risk. And there's some point where what you're doing is so outrageous, the legal risk is very high. And there's points where what you're doing is so innocent, the legal risk is very low, but it's never zero and it's never 100%. And there's a huge gray area where you
yeah,
have like, how much risk are we taking? How much is my risk appetite? That's the realistic way to deal with it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Risk appetites, huh?
Well, that's why I
So,
mean, I first heard in China, the internet laws are very unclear. They say something like, you are not allowed to say things that harm the people's faith in their government and therefore harm society. Nobody knows what that means. So people start commenting on their social networks and then they comment more and more and push it further and further. And then every few years, the government comes in and locks up a bunch of people and shuts down the internet shops and everything. And then everyone shuts up for a while and then they start talking again because nobody knows where the line is. And I guess it's
yeah,
pretty much the same here. You don't
yeah,
really know where the line is, and neither does the government. And so things aren't really consistent or clear.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
um,
Interesting, huh? Interesting stories that we have. How people are doing things that normally they wouldn't do. And but that's all throughout history, I would argue.
yeah, I think the internet succeeded. We now know what's going on much more than we ever did. So we hear a lot more news. We're finding out more of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
All right, what's your next story? Let's move
that's
on.
all of them.
Oh, that's it for you?
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
I think
Well,
maybe that's enough for today, eh?
yep. We'll join us again on Tuesday.
Okay. Farewell.